Institute, and I am the Program Director for the Environmental Change Research Network, ECRN here. And what you're looking at on the screen on all of our little rectangles is a group of institutes and centers at Berkeley working on climate and energy issues. So let's do introductions, and we'll try and group them, Kate and Nuantara, so that you can get a sense. I sent you the list of who's going to be, most of the people are going to be on the call, but I'll try and group them. And if you could just do name and center or organization, and then a sentence or two max on kind of a research area that you work on, so that Kate and Nuantara can get a better sense if they don't know you already. So
Thanks,
we'll start.
Bruce, and we do know many of you already, but it'll be really good to know what you're focusing on in your research in particular.
But just short, because we really want to get to hearing the research priorities from Kate and from Nuantara. So we'll start with folks that are housed at the law school. So I see Ethan, why don't you start?
Sure. So, hi guys, Ethan Elkind with the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment at Berkeley Law. I think I know most of you on this Brady Bunch-like screen that I've got in front of me. So it's hard to narrow down the research topics, but VMT, definitely, zero emission vehicles, and renewable energy. I know that's not one, but sorry, I had to throw them all out there.
Thanks. Ted, where are you?
Hi. Nice to see everyone. Work with Ethan and Ken and Fan at CLE. And I just would add grid resilience to one of the issues that we're looking at right now.
Great. Fan Dai?
Thanks, Bruce. Hi, Kate and all. I'm with the China Climate Institute. One project we're working on is looking at the pathway for China's mid-century strategy, and also compare that with California's 2045 carbon neutrality pathway.
Great. Ken?
Hi, Ken Alex, at Project Climate at Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment.
Wait,
mostly,
who are you? Wait.
mostly trying to give assignments to Nuantara whenever possible. Still.
So, and for anyone that's not getting the inside joke here, Ken was the director of the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. So, okay, let's stay with policy. David Woolley at Goldman.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Kate. Hi, Nuantara. I direct the Environmental Center at the Goldman School. We're the Secretariat for the California Green Bond and Market Development Committee, which is meeting later today via Zoom. And we also just released about 10 days ago our 2035 report that looks at the ways in which the U.S. could get to a 90% zero emission electric sector by 2035. It's got some really interesting cost, employment, health numbers in there. Hope you all take a look at it.
Great. Thanks, David. Built environment, Gail.
Unmute. Hello, I'm Gail Brager. I'm with the Center for the Built Environment. We're a consortium with 50 industry partners with a focus on energy, energy efficiency, indoor environmental quality, and occupant health and well-being.
Thank you, Gail. And is Bill Eisenstein here? I don't see Bill yet. No?
I don't see Bill right now.
Okay. So Bill Eisenstein may join us, Center for Resource Efficient Communities. How about water? David?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm David Sedlak. I'm the director of the Berkeley Water Center, and I also serve as a bridge to the National Alliance for Water Innovation at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, which is a DOE initiative on desalination, and a bridge to the National Science Foundation Engineering Research Center on reinventing the nation's urban water infrastructure, or Renew It. So my focus is on water quality and drinking water provision and sea level rise.
Thank you, David. Those with energy in the name. So let's do CIEE. We have 3 or 4 people from. Carl, want to start, please?
Yeah, hi. I'm the director of the California Institute for Energy and Environment, and right now we're involved in a fair amount of work on the electricity grid, and we're also responsible for a project called EcoBlock. I see a couple other folks here that can tell more about what they're doing.
Great. Terry and then Barbara.
Hi, Terry Searles. I'm with Carl at CIE. Our focus right now is working with the CPUC on demand response and energy efficiency, and also actually working with Ted and Ethan on expedited dispute resolution on interconnections. And just a bit expanded, I'm also retired from University of Hawaii, but still active there working on grid issues for Hawaiian Electric and the PUC there. And for Kate, since we're talking about climate change, I'm a child of the labs. My first climate change project was when I was at Argonne National Lab in 1981.
Great, thank you, welcome. Barbara?
Hi, I'm Barbara Hyatt, and I'm half-time working with Carl at CIE and half-time with David Willey at CEPP, both focused on the quality of carbon offsets, focused on doing a review of California's carbon offset protocols, as well as helping the University of California develop our strategy for procuring carbon offsets to meet our 2025 carbon neutrality goal.
Great, thank you. Andrew Campbell.
Hi, I'm Andy Campbell, Executive Director at the Energy Institute at Haas, and we are part of the business school, but very much intertwined with the College of Natural Resources. And we're made up of 9 faculty economists who are all extremely active researchers in a wide variety of areas. A couple of research themes that have been coming through recently, and we expect to be focusing more so. One is around equity, the intersection between inequality and pollution and climate. That area, several researchers are launching new projects or would like to launch new projects. And also transportation and electric vehicles in particular, thinking about kind of consumer decision-making around adoption or not of electric vehicles.
Great, thanks Andy. Transportation, Tim Lipman.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Tim Littman, co-director of the Transportation Sustainability Research Center, which is part of the Institute of Transportation Studies at Berkeley. And I'm also a research affiliate with the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And my work is on transportation electrification mostly, but I also do some work on building energy systems, microgrids, battery and fuel cell storage. So I'm not purely transportation, but most of my work is transportation and sort of electric vehicle implementation and smart charging and impacts of EVs on utility grids is a lot of our work. I'm also involved in the EcoBlock project that Carl mentioned. I also have a strong role in this new project we have with Cal EPA that is a carbon neutrality study for California by 2045, involving all 4 of our ITSs, Berkeley, Davis, UCLA, and Irvine are all working on this study where we're gonna have a draft report in the fall showing a trajectory where we could get to carbon neutrality in transportation by 2045. And I'm involved in both the light duty vehicle and also the VMT reduction elements of that project.
Great.
Thanks, Tim. Was just reviewing your detailed outline on that.
Report.
Very involved in that project.
Good bedtime reading. Some good bedtime reading.
For all of us. Technology and many things. Costas at Citrus.
Yes, thank you. I just turned on my video for the occasion. So Costas Panos, professor of ECS. I'm the director of CITES and the Banato Institute. CITES is a large 4-campus research institute that reports to the Office of the President. Is one of 4 across the University of California. We are looking at information technology in general applications, and we have a big sustainability branch. The CIE that Carl Blumstein described and others is now part of CITES, and we're glad to be sponsoring EcoBlock and other projects. And on my off time, I am also the director of BEARS, which is a research institute in Singapore, run by the University of California, with the focus is on smart buildings. That's a very large project, dozens of professors involved, big test beds and so on. So very excited to be part of this organization here. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Costas. David, CNR and the campus.
Hi, David Eckerly. There may be a little background noise, sorry. Dean of Rausser College of Natural Resources, here in a supportive role of all of our efforts on behalf of energy, climate, and environment and fundraising for campus. That's another discussion we'd be happy to have with folks in Sacramento. And my personal research is biodiversity, forest ecology, fire ecology, and all of the climate challenges that are posed to those areas.
Great. And Michelle?
Sorry.
Yeah, there you are.
Hi, everyone. This is a great, great cast of a famous faculty at Berkeley. I love seeing everyone do government relations for the campus, and I know Kate as well, and happy to help facilitate this engagement. So thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, Michelle. Did we miss anybody on the campus side? Great. Okay, Nuantara and Kate and Julia, quick introductions. I sent them little bios of you, but we probably didn't all have time to read them. So quick introductions of yourselves, please. Kate?
Sure, I'll go first. Kate Gordon, Director of the Office of Planning and Research, following in Ken's very large footsteps. Also the Chair of the Strategic Growth Council. I should say I'm a graduate of Berkeley Law and the City Planning Joint Program. I'm also on the board of both ITS across all 4 campuses and on Bill Collins's ERA advisory board. So lots of engagement with Berkeley in a variety of ways, and great to see all of you.
Thanks, Kate.
Nuantara?
Great. Yeah, Nuantara Key, Deputy Director for Climate Resilience at OPR. So work for Kate. Formerly worked for Ken. So yeah, we run our adaptation program out of OPR, which is really charged with figuring out how do we better align state and local efforts on adaptation and resilience, but really looking at how do we drive implementation on the ground. Part of that is figuring out how we get actionable climate science into the hands of decision makers and policymakers to inform their efforts. So really excited to connect with you all on this conversation.
Great, thanks, Nuantara. Julia?
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you. My name is Julia Osterman. I'm an intern with OPR this summer, working with Kate and Nuantara on climate resilience issues, and then on biomass and feedstock issues in Northern California. I just graduated from Stanford's Business School with a joint MBA and Master's of Science in Environment and Resources. Prior to coming to the GSA, I worked at the Nature Conservancy, and I've been working on issues at the intersection of climate change, economic development, ecosystem services, and I'm thrilled to be a fly on the wall for this meeting and learn from you all.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everyone. So purpose of the meeting, we go till noon. We want to hear OPR's top research priorities around climate and energy issues. We want to, if we can, further illuminate a few of them. We want mainly to hear them and ask clarifying questions, and then to hear some climate research ideas from all of you, from our side. But this initial meeting, and we hope it's the first of a couple like this, is mainly to hear OPR and understand what research needs as they really are developing a very aggressive climate program, both for GHGs, which, as you know, in California, we've had a pretty aggressive program now for a number of years, but also now on adaptation and resilience on both. So I've asked Kate just to make a few opening remarks to set a little context for OPR's work in the states, the Newsom administration with climate, and then Nuantara is going to walk us through the handout that I sent you this morning, a couple hours ago, with some more specific ideas around adaptation and resilience. And we'll do that for about 20 minutes. And then Kate will walk us through some ideas from them on the GHG side on reducing emissions. So that's how we'll go here. And Kate, you're on for a few opening remarks here.
Thanks, Bruce. I'll just do a little on, some of you obviously know this well, but not everybody does, on sort of what OPR and the Strategic Growth Council, which are really part of the same. OPR is an umbrella over 3 different areas of the state policy and planning program, the Strategic Growth Council, and Cal Volunteers, actually. But for OPR and SGC, just a couple of kind of context remarks. The OPR really exists to do long-range planning for the state, and then the Strategic Growth Council is the council of secretaries from the relevant agencies that do long-range planning across housing, transportation, health, and climate and environment. So we do a lot of things under that umbrella, but the big buckets are really sort of anything related to land use. And so that's housing, transportation, natural and working lands, SIGMA implementation, just that whole bucket of land and how land use how we think about long-term land use and growth. Within that is really economic development and workforce development, because that's such a big part of how we think about growth and how we think about economic growth and actually how we develop in California. Climate resilience is a huge piece of that because it's long-term planning to become more resilient to current impacts and future impacts. And then we have a set of research activities that are outside of that, that are long-range research activities that I won't go into now because they're not actually related to climate or energy at all. One of the things we do that's, I mean, I would say like more than 50% of my job is actually interagency alignment, because we sit at the intersection of so many things in the state. We do a lot of work just to align other agencies. And actually our statute says that we do conflict resolution across agencies. And that does feel like a lot of what we do. Aligning across agencies on key issues that have multiple inputs from multiple places. And I want to give some examples of that because it's valuable for you all to know what we're focusing on, what the interagency kind of directions are that we're focusing on right now. We have interagency groups that have been formed, and they're either at the principal or the deputy level on freight and logistics, which is a huge issue facing the state from a land use and climate perspective, SIGMA implementation, and these are all with other agencies as well, biomass and feedstocks and the whole wood products forestry conversation, government resilience and resilient investment, regional planning generally, how do we engage more at a regional level with planning, and then housing and transportation. So that's just an example of the number of things we're currently running interagency processes on. I also coordinate something that we call the climate cabinet, which is the secretary level, the secretaries from the cabinet agencies and the independent boards and commissions, CARB, California Energy Commission, and the PUC, in a cabinet level discussion monthly on some of the key issues that we're all trying to coordinate on across the administration. So we do a lot of that coordination work. I also am the governor's senior advisor on climate, and so I play a role as a liaison to the governor's office on many of these issues. That's where we're centrally involved in the carbon neutrality studies that Tim was just talking about, the GGRF, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund budget, and the priority setting around GGRF, the climate budget more generally, which was a concept we came up with for the January budget and which completely fell apart for the May revised, because we're in such a challenging budget situation, as you all know, and you all are in as well, so I don't have to tell you about it. And some of the cross-cutting issues like the idea of how we do climate investment and leverage private investment across all these areas. And I'll talk a little bit more about our policy goals for this year, but at a kind of a high level, I wanted to say that Governor Newsom is he's really committed to an integrated approach on climate. So he's really committed to, looking at where we have really incredibly forward-looking and forward-thinking, ambitious goals in all of our climate areas, including not only in our clean energy standard, in our 5 million EVs goal, in our carbon neutrality by 2045. Those are all huge goals. We have, tens of goals underneath that in every area. I mean, probably up to 100 altogether. He's really interested in not, as he always says, not the why, but the how and who. How do we actually accomplish them? How do we actually meet the goals? Who needs to be involved? How do we move them forward? What are the tactical and strategic implementation plans we need to put in place? And so a lot of what we do is working together across agencies to build up integrated implementation plans so we can actually meet many of these goals. We are not on track, I'm sorry to say, to meet a lot of them. just like every other country and subnational in the world. We are not on track. So we are, in some cases, we have some very, very good, we're very much on track in some cases. We're doing very well in renewable energy so far, although there's some challenges, as you all know. And we're doing very well on energy efficiency so far, although there's some challenges. But we are not on track on transportation in particular, and some of other areas. And particularly around land use and VMT reduction as part of our transportation strategy. So we're very focused. He is very focused on implementation and on actually meeting the goals. That's kind of where 99% of our heads are. And the other big bucket for him, of course, the first week of his administration was the PG&E bankruptcy announcement and the ratings agencies downgrading all of our utilities and the Wildfire Commission ramping up and just all of that. So resilience in the face of current climate impacts is a big focus for the governor. And one that he's put a lot of attention toward and we spend a lot of our time on. So those big buckets of things, implementing to get to actually meeting our goals, and climate resilience as a key part of our climate agenda are two big overarching things. And I'll stop there, Bruce.
Thank you, Kate. Very good. And we'll come back and do some more in depth with you on your GHG kind of priorities. Transportation VMT you called out, and also in the email you sent, negative emissions, carbon sinks, and all of that as two priorities. But let's turn to Nuantara and talk for about 15 minutes about adaptation and resilience priorities. And what I told Kate and Nuantara, we're interested in research projects, obviously, and in identifying some real needs, and then we would go put a team together and look for funding and all of that. But we're also interested in convenings, like law school has done, certainly around certain topics. And those kinds of things. We did one last year around wildfire with Carl and CIEE with wildfire and health. So those kinds of convenings is also another way we could go at this. And we're also interested in students and how can we get our students at all levels involved here. So be thinking about
just
those
really quickly on that. And we've talked to Ethan and Ted a lot about this, but I generally see, we have these interagency, very internal conversations about really tricky issues where frankly, our agencies are working at cross purposes in some cases. Once we get past that sort of initial tricky, getting everybody on the same page, similar goals, is a great moment to say, let's have somebody outside the administration convene stakeholders so we can actually bring in other perspectives to that conversation in a way that doesn't, it's more complicated for us to do it for a bunch of reasons. So I think that's a really good opportunity. And we've done some of that with Ethan and Ted, but we're always interested in doing more of that.
Great. And so are we. Okay, Nuantara, you're on and we have a handout that I sent this morning if you want to follow along, and Nuantara can walk us through. You have kind of two big categories here on economics of adaptation and resilience metrics, and then things underneath that. So go ahead.
Yeah, great. So thanks everybody again. So yeah, what I laid out in this document is really focusing in on two priority areas, as Bruce mentioned. The first is getting a much better handle on the economics of climate risk. And so that's, from our perspective, both understanding the economic costs as well as the benefits of adaptation actions. There's been a lot of work in this space, but I would say it's been, well, maybe there's not a lot. There's been a growing effort to focus on this space, but it's not, I think we're still missing some really substantive foundational information to help us understand how do we even think about the costs. And so two things I would say kind of framing for how we're thinking about this. One is we've really been trying to move away from what, at least from my perspective, I've seen in the last couple years of this shift or drive to try to find the one cost to the entire economy out to 2050 or out to 2100 of what climate risk means to the state, for a number of reasons. One, kind of lack of kind of technical ability to do that, and the soundness of that type of effort. But then two, on the policy side, I think that type of large, significant cost number can sometimes be paralyzing to the policy space. So we're trying to find a way to both kind of technically accurately understand what are the economic costs, which is why we framed it out kind of as a sector-based approach. So how do we really understand the economic costs to key sectors of California's economies and within communities? And then two, being able to parse out, well, what are the benefits of different adaptation efforts in buying down those future costs and risks? So that's a big body of work. There are a couple of suggested kind of more detailed ideas under there. I'm not going to go through all of them now, but I do just want to point out that this item B on the document I pulled together, this loss avoidance quantification, is something that in the nearer term, from my perspective, would be helpful for us to get a better handle on, especially as we're starting to see some shifts in how FEMA and some of the disaster recovery dollars are starting to be framed out. So that, I'm just pointing out, would be an interesting idea in the nearer term for us to explore, because it might help us better derive limited federal dollars to the types of activities we're trying to support here. So that's that one.
Tara, could you say just a little more about what loss avoidance quantification is, what you're after?
Yeah, so yes, a little bit here. So right now what there are, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds here and kind of the FEMA quantification, and I also would not claim to be an expert on that because it still is a bit of a black box for me. But you know, how we think about or how we quantify future risk and how we quantify avoided risk is something that I think we need to get a better handle on, as we're starting to see already really changing shifts in climate impacts and how it's affecting communities. And so I think this also ties into what Kate laid out at the beginning in terms of how we think about land use decisions and long-term planning decisions. You know, we're not necessarily incorporating the real kind of future risks associated with where we grow or how we develop. And part of that is because we don't have some of the technical information to actually understand that. So for example, in the wildfire context, how we think about growth and development is really important to understanding future risk. And, you know, so, and we have limited information on that. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks.
So so there's lots more there we could dig into, but the next category is thinking about resilience metrics. And this one is a priority for us because, as Kate was mentioning, on the emissions side, right, we're not on track to meet our goals. I would say on the adaptation side, we don't quite even know what the goals are we're trying to get to beyond a general, like, yes, we need to address physical climate risk. So we need to build the track, and then we need to hopefully get on it and achieve goals there. And so one of the things that's a definite priority for us in this next, really thinking about the next couple of years, year and a half, as we're thinking about an update to the state's adaptation strategy, is how do we start identifying the right metrics that we can achieve or track, towards achievable goals and outcomes in the resilience space. And I think one of the things early on when we launched our program, and Bruce was involved in all these conversations as part of our advisory council. I mean, there's been a big call for this type of work for a while. I think we've evolved in moving the conversation from people wanting one big metric that you can roll up like you can in the emissions reduction side, to understanding it's actually much more complex, and you need metrics across different systems, you need sector-based metrics, and we also need to understand what are metrics that are really only meaningful at a local or regional scale that actually don't really help at a statewide scale. So we're trying to navigate some of that now, but having some support there would be tremendously helpful for us. Last thing I will say, and then I will stop here, is that there are two areas kind of in that space where potentially kind of convening or more of that facilitated dialogue could be really helpful. Is one, around the resilience metrics. I think there's a lot of space for us for learning and information sharing to help inform our thinking and bringing experts in who can help us. The second is around vulnerable communities. So we've done some early kind of foundational thinking on how we define vulnerable communities in an adaptation context. We really want to drive that work forward and start building out an actionable, measurable kind of tool or platform so that policymakers, decision makers can actually understand vulnerability as they're making policy investments and decisions. So that was part of our, Kate mentioned the climate budget. We had a funding proposal as part of that package to actually start building out a tool that would help us do that. So now in the current budget context, we're trying to kind of regroup and figure out how do we keep that work going. And that's another space where really for any tool to be meaningful and also to have the right support, it needs to be done in partnership with community and in partnership with the especially community-based organizations that have been really leading in this space. So I will stop there.
Great, thank you, Nu and Tara. Before we get to Kate and talking about GHGs, questions for Nu and Tara, the economics of adaptation, and that you see on your sheet 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 different possibilities there, and then another set on resilience metrics. Questions?
Can I just underscore one thing Nu and Tara said, and then love to have questions, which is, I think it's really, really important to underscore that unlike the mitigation side, we don't have really the metrics or the track on the resilience side, and we also don't have the budget. I mean, that was something we were trying very hard to change in the January budget. And again, most of that is now gone, except for some work in, of course, fire management and forest management. But we just don't have the budget for most of this stuff. And so we really rely on partnerships and outside research and just leveraging as much as we possibly can. So I just wanted to underscore that.
Good, and I'll underline one thing I saw when the administration presented the January budget to Senate Budget Committee hearing in, when was that, Kate? In January or February? February, probably.
February.
Back when we were having in-person meetings, so it must have been February. And Senator Stern and a couple of others took this cost issue really head on and said, look, if we put $1 billion or $6 billion bond issue on the ballot, which was one of the things being discussed, what do we tell Californians they're getting for that? And what are they avoiding? You know, are we gonna solve the problem completely with sea level rise with $6 billion? No, but what is it that we can start to give legislators and then the public some comfort level with what we're getting for X dollars? Questions on Kate or on Nu and Tara's stuff here? Okay, Andy? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, following on Bruce, you may provide an illustration of the question I have, but if you're successful in kind of building out this economic analysis of adaptation, cost and benefits, like what do you see as what is sort of the hoped for government action that comes from that? Like how does that inform your agency activities or other things?
Nu and Tara, can I do high level and then you can do specifics on this? You know, we really feel, and I think most of the folks who are out there in the sort of physical climate risk world, many of whom are in the private sector and the investment world, to be clear, we really feel that this has to be integrated across everything we do. So the goal is to really be able to say, from a fiscal responsibility, effective government perspective, we have to take this stuff on now and spend the money today to save the money tomorrow. And we need to integrate that ultimately through our investment decisions with the pension funds, through our operational decisions with our assets and our, you know, we own a lot of stuff. I mean, we have billions of dollars in transportation assets that we deploy through infrastructure all the time. We have 19 million square feet of buildings. We have 51,000 fleet vehicles. We just have a huge number of assets as a state. And so what we're kind of saying is we need to be best in class as an asset owner and investor in integrating this throughout all of our decision making. and also, you know, actively push the federal government to do that, and to work with the private sector to do that. That's kind of where I would say that's kind of the holy grail, because if you take resilience as a one-off kind of siloed issue, you actually don't get to those core decisions that need to be made throughout every aspect of government and the private sector. So that's where we're hoping to get. And we've just found, I think everyone has found who's worked on this, that making that into a core fiscal and economic issue, getting finance on board, getting the treasurer on board, getting controller on board, making it about those core decisions is the way to move that forward. So that's what we're really aiming at.
Nuantara, were you going to add?
I would just add one thing, kind of next level down too, is as we're thinking about how then we operationalize that in our day-to-day work and investments or policy decisions, we need help understanding how do we prioritize or weigh one potential, you know, outcome or funding stream and investments in a certain area relative to another. And part of that is understanding in the economic sense of, again, that kind of what are we buying down towards what? And so it's, for us, we're spending money, we're making decisions now without that information. And we really need to start thinking about what are the early actions we have to take now, and how do we sequence them for longer term benefit as well. And so I think, for example, we get caught in this space of, well, is dealing with wildfire a more urgent pressing issue than sea level rise? And I think that's the wrong conversation for us to have. We need to understand what are the types of interventions we need to put in place today to deal with wildfire and sea level rise. And they may be different, and they may be different scales of investment, but we don't have that information to tease that out right now.
Great, good, thanks. Ken? Yeah.
You know, it strikes me that one of the confounding problems here is that you've got state level issues like you just identified, sea level rise and fire, and then they have implications both at a grand scale and then also at a local scale. And so I'm wondering if you've thought at all about, or might be interested in thinking about sort of what is community? What is a resilient community? What are the attributes of a resilient community in different settings along the coast, in the Sierras, et cetera? And then once you define that, that might be able to help create a track or a set of matrix, you know, some way to calibrate it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're hoping to get at through this metrics. What I was calling this metrics piece is, it's not just tracking kind of outputs of investments and that kind of that more counting side, but it's actually understanding what is it we are working towards, and how do we define that in a local context that's actually meaningful in a specific community or a specific region, because those outcomes are going to need to, you know, obviously look differently for that place. So that's what we are hoping to get at, kind of embedded in that metrics work as well.
And Ken, it's a great question. And one of the challenges that we have also is that there isn't actually a regional level framework in the state to make these kinds of decisions. And a lot of the work we're doing, as you know, at OPR and SGC, is trying to figure out how to, frankly, put more teeth behind the regional planning tools that we have at the state level. We have some regional planning tools like the Sustainable Community Strategy that is great in concept and doesn't actually really have much enforcement power, and creates a lot of work for a lot of regional agencies who then get ignored when people are doing planning. So it's very frustrating for everybody. We're trying to figure out how do we think through getting more teeth there. And one of the biggest reasons for that is that resilience is inherently a regional issue. I mean, fires don't respect regional boundaries, floods don't respect regional boundaries, extreme heat is a very regional issue. These are sea level rise, you can do something at a local level that can actually be a problem for the next town 3 towns down, right? So you have to think about this stuff regionally. What are the structures that we can help put in place as a state to allow for regional planning, both on emissions, which also don't respect regional boundaries, and resilience. And that's kind of a parallel but really important effort. So there's a community scale piece, there's a regional piece, and then there's a state piece, and how do all those things kind of work together? And I'll just be honest, one of our big policy priorities at OPR in general is regional planning, getting some teeth behind regional planning, because we just don't see how you can do it without that.
Great. So we'll go away and look at the whole list and talk about it some amongst ourselves. Kate, why don't you, I'm cognizant of the time here. Why don't we switch briefly to the GHG side? And you were talking in your email about negative emissions, carbon sinks, and transportation, I think VMT. Why don't you talk about a couple of your top priorities, please?
Yeah, and I want to be clear, like there's a lot going on with mitigation, right? And the things, as climate advisor, obviously I'm looking and we're looking across all of it, and we work with everybody about everything. But there are parts of the emissions picture that are very clearly already kind of outlined, defined. There's goals, there's frameworks, there are people working on them. I mean, CARB has over 1,000 people, working on the scoping plan and whatever is under its purview, CEC, PUC. There's regulatory processes to carry out some of our big goals. So I'm going to focus less on those, even though I know they're really important, because they're not what OPR is centrally involved in. We're centrally involved in the places where there isn't already a framework and a regulatory process or a specific policy process in place. And so 2 of those, I'm going to do 2.5 actually. The 2 that I put in the email, and then I'm going to add one. One of those, and I brought it up before, really is vehicle miles traveled is a shorthand, frankly, for the emissions impacts of very, very sprawled land use development and the amount that people drive in California. So we know from CARB that even if we 10x our electric vehicles by 2030, we need to reduce VMT by 25% to meet our goals. That's in the SB 150 report, which is a great report, which essentially is the report that outlines how we're not meeting our goals on the land use side. Reducing VMT is extremely complicated, and it has to do with everything. It has to do with how we protect our natural and working lands. It has to do with how we do housing development, how we do transportation planning. The single biggest tool we have in that space, honestly, is SB 743, which passed in 2013 and changes the metric used in CEQA for transportation impact analysis from something called level of service, which Tim will know all about, to something called VMT, or vehicle miles traveled. Essentially goes from measuring congestion at specific intersections around a project to measuring the actual induced travel or induced additional vehicle miles traveled from the project. That's really, really important, because when you're mitigating for LOS, you tend to just put in more freeway lanes and other things that you think will reduce congestion. When you're mitigating for VMT, you actually do planning differently. So that switch is set to happen on July 1st. It is still set to happen on July 1st. There is a massive political effort to get it to be delayed that we are working very, very hard to stop right now. But there's a lot going on with that, so I don't want to say anything definitive, but so far July 1st is the date that switch will happen. And to me, 1/5 of the state, I should say, has already made the switch. To me, this is like the single most important thing that we have as a tool in our toolbox, but it doesn't get all the way to all the other tools that we need. Housing is a climate issue, and it has to be seen as a climate issue. So to you all, I would say, the city and regional planning folks should be at the table for this conversation. I mean, Karen Chappell's obviously done, Christina Hill have done a ton of work on climate. That set of decisions at the local level are critical to us in California, to how we do planning. And so that's really, really important to us. Just how do we get at reducing VMT? What are the strategy? What are the creative approaches? How can we think about, investments? How can we think about, what other tools are in the toolbox? The next big one that I would say that, again, we don't have a clear framework, but it's a necessity to meet our goals, is negative emissions or carbon removal, or however you want to describe that set of things. We know from the IPCC 1.5 degree report and from everything that's been written by everybody that you have to do a piece of the wedge that is below, that is negative emissions, in order to meet any of our goals for the Paris Agreement and just our global climate goals. How we do that, there's a natural and working lands piece of that. It's not the entire picture. there's also a piece of that that is ultimately going to be about research and thinking through some of the engineered solutions like direct air capture. We have an interagency group on this. We're starting to think it through. We're trying to figure out how to incorporate it into how we think about our emissions picture. It's not there yet. And there's an enormous need for academia in this space. It spans a lot of different areas: soil science, engineering. It's a huge, complex puzzle. The legal regimes are really complex. So that's a big area that I would say the more help, the better. Everyone's trying to figure this out across the world. And it's something that we know we have to do as a state. We will not reach our goals without it. And the final thing, which is the 2.5 piece, because somebody raised it, I think it was Ted or Ethan, grid resilience is really important. And it's at the intersection of the things Nuantara and I just talked about, right? We need to do grid resilience because it makes us more climate resilient. And also the way we do it has to reduce emissions. So it's right there at the intersection. And a lot of people are thinking about it and talking about it, but it still feels to me a little unformed as a set of goals for the state and something that we could all do more work on. So I'll stop there.
Great. A question for both of you. Would it be helpful in the near term to move, not during this meeting, but after this meeting, to specific research projects that you would need, or would it be more helpful to convene a small group and talk more with, we could pull in some other people from campus, you could pull in some other people. Which approach generally would be best to think about as a next step here?
I mean, from my perspective, and Nuantara might disagree with this, but I think it's always good to convene first, just because I don't want to say that we all always know what the research agenda should look like. I mean, we have a piece of the research agenda, but I think there's a lot going on that we need as inputs into that, honestly. And we have the problem, honestly, even more now than before with COVID and social distancing. Before, the people who happened to come to Sacramento and set up meetings were the people we heard from and who happened to send us stuff. And so that's what and then you don't know a bunch of other stuff. And half the people are sending, the same email to 7 departments without CCing other people. And so no one knows what conversations are happening. And, with the number of academic institutions that come with the same proposal across every institution and no one knows who's engaging with them or how, is amazing, right? And I feel like that's only gotten worse. So anything that centralizes the conversation so that we can agree on a research agenda and then think through what's already been done, what needs to be done, and what are the priorities, that's extremely helpful from my perspective. Nuantara, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Absolutely agree. And I would offer that I'm happy to help kind of be that conduit to help think about who from the our state partners should be part of that kind of convening conversation. I think maybe what would be helpful is a little bit of a hybrid of having some buckets or categories for us to explore and talk about, but then making sure there's that interagency conversation, as Kate was saying. So I'm happy to help be that conduit to make sure we're getting the right people for that type of conversation. The one thing I would just flag is that I think, and Kate can disagree, and this is me being selfish here, but the vulnerable communities kind of platform tool, actually how we drive that, is a priority for me, given my OPR hat, trying to think about how we implement our program. So that one may be a little bit more of a one-on-one conversation. How would we scope that out? Obviously would want interagency participation in that, but just flagging that one might be a little bit separate than what Kate flagged, just because nobody is doing that right now, and I think are really the ones who need to lead on that. But
yeah, no, I agree with that. I would put that in more in the resilience than the GHG, the mitigation bucket, but totally agree. It's a huge priority, and we're the only people doing it. So it's definitely absolutely a priority.
So comments, suggestions, Gail, David, any of you, Andy, as to how to proceed here, what you've heard or what you're thinking.
Well, we only have a couple moments. The big picture, we're here. We're a state agency. This is our job. So we really want to find a way to partner. That's the most important thing. Then it's all in the details, like we've been talking about. I think the highlights you've hit are all areas of huge strength. And I would, let me just give you a couple highlights. I mean, one thing in terms of the vulnerable communities, I forget whether we've shared this. We're actually about to launch a cluster hire of 5 new faculty around climate equity issues, 5 new faculty positions spanning 4 schools. So within 2 years, that puts us in a very different position. This spans CED, engineering, CNR, and social sciences. The other thing just to highlight is in our early stages of our environment campaign priority in terms of philanthropic fundraising, we have a negative emissions working group. So we're doing some internal self-organizing on where we lead on negative emissions, both on some of the cutting edge chemistry, the actual new chemistry of compounds that remove CO2 from the atmosphere, but also the ecosystem side. I think that transportation and other issues are really well represented here. So those are 2 I would especially highlight. And maybe the third is just the intersection of fire resilience, VMT, and land use, because there's obviously, you all know very well, the potential wins. It's just less clear what the research problem is, as opposed to just huge implementation barriers around policy and the role of counties. And but those are 3 areas that jump out for me, but not exclusive to all the other interests here.
David, thank you. It's Kate. And just really quickly on your fire point, something we argue a lot, but honestly, we're lacking in really good analysis on it, is just the trade-offs that are being made. So we get into these very siloed conversations about like fighting with people about the wood that we're taking out of the forest for forest management and whether it should sit on the side of the road and produce methane, or whether we should burn it, or whether we should use it for something. And if we use it for bioenergy, is that worse or better than, you know what I mean? Like all of those trade-offs, you know, should we be paving over areas of high fire risk because then you ultimately may make them higher fire risk because they're, you know what I mean? Like there's all these trade-offs. And I feel like those trade-offs are very hard for us to talk about because the conversation gets political and siloed in each little place. So to the extent that there's possibility of, like on your fire land use question, you know, taking an example of something and thinking through the trade-offs that are happening across the policy decisions from an emissions and a resilience perspective, that's really helpful if that's even possible.
Thank you.
And can I really quickly get on a very small soapbox on that point that Kate just mentioned, my own personal one, which is related. We need much better information on the co-benefits and trade-offs between adaptation and mitigation, because right now, from my perspective, where I sit, adaptation, like on emissions reduction, people are like, oh, well, there's all these resilience co-benefits. And there are, but there are also trade-offs, and we're not bringing that into our decision-making. And so that is something that I would love for us to have better information on.
Right. Gail?
So this has been really helpful and informative. Thank you. I think beyond figuring out how we may all prioritize different topics, I think in terms of process, the idea from science to action, really coming up with different models of how our research can make a difference. Because I get increasingly frustrated at just spinning our wheels. I mean, the brain power is incredible. The research contributions from individuals collectively across this campus and then beyond are incredible. Yes, sometimes there are knowledge gaps, but I think the much more significant gaps are how do we just get beyond talking to each other and having this make a difference in practice. And I mean, CBE as an industry consortium is one model that I think has been incredibly successful there, but it's one model. And for whatever our bounded scope is, and there could be other models. And I would love to have more conversations about process and bridging research and practice.
Great point. Totally agree. I would say that one of the reasons we're really excited about this call is the idea of having more of a conduit to a bunch of different kinds of research than everybody coming in with their different things at different times. So it's really helpful to us to have, you know, Bruce or whoever be a person where we can be like, oh, we're struggling with this problem. It's really timely. Who across the network is doing work on this? I will also just call it ITS, not just because I'm on their board, but because I think ITS does a really good job of watching the politics and basically seeing what people are talking about in Sacramento and weighing in at the right time on stuff. So they'll be like, hey, we see that you're having a big fight about VMT right now. Here's 3 papers that we wrote that are supportive of your position. That is super helpful because we can't always, particularly when we're in the middle of a fight, we just can't always go out and look for stuff. So I think that's important too. It's that the conversation has to go both ways.
Okay, and I had one other point because I've been reflecting increasingly about this perfect storm of the environmental crisis and the health crisis we're in and the racial equity crisis we're in, and my head some days are just ready to explode, and thinking more and more that what I just said about the need to bridge research and practice, I think is actually related to the need to bridge issues of social equity. I have to say that our field of sustainability is a very white field. And as an engineer teaching in architecture, and I have every fall a colloquium where I bring in speakers. I'm writing a book now where I'm trying to put together case studies about sensory experience. And the people doing this work and the kinds of projects we're doing, I don't think we need to highlight just these incredible, amazing, idiosyncratic architectural examples and singular net zero energy buildings. We have to affect affordable housing. We have to affect communities that can't afford all of the bells and whistles. And when I look at the project examples that I'm trying to highlight in the book and the people who are doing incredible work that I'm trying to bring into the colloquium, I'm sorry, but it is a very privileged community.
You're absolutely right. And this is something
so
we bring
if
up all
we
the
can
time.
find ways to bridge that, I think it's a win-win-win.
I think that's right. And let me just say, I think that that goes also to the need to not just look at the like, where do we need to be by 2045 and make everybody do that thing, but actually thinking about what the steps are to get there and how they actually impact different communities and what they look like in different places. My big example that's like yours is not everybody can buy an electric vehicle for a lot of reasons that do not have to do with the availability of electric vehicles or charging. There's a lot of other stuff going on, and having out there as that's the only right answer and everything else is wrong is an incredibly elitist approach on electric vehicles. There is a way forward on that is more accessible to more people. And so I think we've got to think through that too. What are the land use implications? What are the credit enhancement implications? What are getting people better jobs so they can afford things? I mean, there's a lot going on underneath that. So totally agree with you.
Thank you, Kate.
I think we're going to end there. It's noon and a number of people I know have noon meetings. So look, thank you. I will play bridge here between Nuantara and Kate and all of you for the network. I'll be in contact with each of you. We didn't get to everybody here to speak via email and solicit some more input. And then we'll be back with, we've got a couple of, I'd say, very big ideas there for what to do next. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Nuantara. Thank you, Julia. Thanks to all of you for giving the time.
Sorry, we always give long answers and we didn't give you more chances to ask questions. And Bruce, I'm actually able to stay on for like 10 more minutes if people want, but otherwise we can just take off.
Okay.
I gotta go. Thank you very much.
If you want to stay on for a few more minutes, I'm available for like 10 minutes. So
I need this Zoom account though for the next meeting.
Forget that then.
Thank you all, and we'll be in touch very soon.
Bye guys. Thank you so much.
Be safe.